Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next edition of the Sustainable Connections podcast. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Global Director of Thought Leadership at ERM and your regular host. We're going to be exploring aspects of what's going on in the renewables space, kind of focusing in on wind energy. And I have two great guests with me to have that conversation. So, first, Feng Zhao is with us from the Global Wind Energy Council. And Feng is the Chief Research Officer at GWEC. We'll probably default to that acronym some of the time as well. So, Feng, welcome and thanks so much for joining us. And also with me from inside ERM is Breanne Gellatly. Breanne is a partner in our renewables business. Breanne, hello, welcome. Breanne, maybe sticking with you, I just would love to give you and Feng a brief opportunity to introduce yourselves, explain your role a bit more, and what you do, each for ERM and the Global Wind Energy Council. So, Breanne, kick us off.
I've been with ERM for about 2 years. I worked in the renewables practice. I've been working in the wind industry, onshore and offshore, for the last 20 years, including working for suppliers to the wind industry. I'm one of 400 people in the renewables practice at ERM, and my projects typically focus on strategy, markets, and growing work in supply chain topics.
Fantastic. And for folks listening, ERM today is about 8,000 people. So the fact that we have 400 folks working on renewables all the time, it's a big proportion of our business and one we're really excited about. Breanne, just one or two, with 20 years of experience, what's different about working on renewables today than when you started?
Oh my goodness. Well, I started in onshore wind, and it's funny because at the time, offshore wind seemed like this crazy idea that no one would ever actually do. And then maybe 10 years later, I found myself working in offshore wind in the innovation space, looking at how to drive down the cost of offshore wind. Of course, this was all fixed bottom projects. And again, at that time, it was like, oh my gosh, floating, like that's crazy. And so now here I am kind of 20 years later, and we're talking about floating projects being commercially competitive. So so it's been an interesting 20 years to just see the evolution of the wind industry.
Yeah, changes in the technology, changes in the scale of investment, and really the opportunity. I think for everybody out there, many of you will be wind and renewables knowledgeable. Fixed bottom project is exactly what it sounds like. It's an offshore wind turbine that's anchored to the seabed. Floating platform is just what it sounds like. It's untethered and of course shifts the environmental impact and everything else. Feng, I want to turn to you, please, and if you can introduce yourself, your own history in the field, and tell us a little bit about the Global Wind Energy Council, please.
I've been with the Global Wind Energy Council for almost 6 years. So we are a membership organization. So it's an NGO. Our jobs is just to promote renewable, help the industry to grow. So looking at the GWEC membership, we work with stakeholders across the entire value chain. We have hundreds of people across global. I've been working with wind since actually I moved to Denmark. I get my education here in Denmark. I've been working and living in Denmark for more than 20 years. So looking at the supply chain, I did my first global supply chain report back in 2006. So almost 20 years.
Thank you both for the introductions. And, for all of you listening, as global as the Global Wind Energy Council is, and as global as the work that ERM does, we're going to kind of key in today on the state of the wind industry in the Asia Pacific region. And Feng, I wondered if I could start with you and just kind of get a description of where we're at. And we've talked on other episodes of the podcast about the Global Renewables Alliance target for 2030 to triple renewables and double efficiency. So if you could maybe put a bit the context of the state of wind energy in APAC into that global goal and the contribution it's making, that would be great.
Before I start, I just want to mention, GWEC, our organization, is one of the initiators for this double down, tripling up target. We launched this initiative actually a year ago. I remember it's September last year. I was in New York, joined with my colleagues and also industry organization. We launched this double down, tripling up at the headquarters of Ørsted, the world's leading offshore wind developer. They have big office in New York. We launched this initiative, and luckily, we got nearly 200 countries sign a pledge at COP29 at Dubai. So this absolutely built a momentum for the renewable industry, specifically for wind, because looking at the future energy mix, either by 2030 or by 2050, we're going to see renewable, primarily wind and solar, play the dominant roles. We have over 1 terawatt installed by the end of last year. Looking at new information, 2023, we had the best year ever, 117 gigawatt installed. It's absolutely fantastic if you compare how many gigawatt we installed 20 years ago. But is this enough? No, it's not. If you're looking at the IEA 2030 or 2050 scenario, to achieve 1.5 energy pathway, the new information by 2030, we need to achieve, according to IEA, that's 320 gigawatt. For ARENA, it's even higher, 350. But, we are only around maybe 1/3. So that's why we said we need to triple, renewable or triple wind power by 2030 in order to achieve the target. And looking at, the APAC region, that's that's the focus for this podcast. For APAC, it's absolutely very crucial for the wind industry because, we have China, we have India. Those two markets, absolutely, they are, two of the largest markets. China specifically, number one in terms of onshore, offshore. India is rising star as well. They are going to be the key drivers in terms of onshore wind, even though they don't have offshore wind installed, but they have some planning in the pipeline.
And Breanne, I'd love to bring you in on the same question of sort of, how we're starting to scale. From what Feng said, of course, we're scaling incredibly rapidly, but still not fast enough, right? That's the living dilemma right now with renewables and energy transition. What kind of barriers stand in the way of more rapid development, and which of those are maybe being knocked down fastest in APAC? What can the rest of the world learn from how progress is being made there?
As far as the challenges that we think are being faced by some of the APAC countries to roll out this triple installation that Feng mentioned earlier, one that came up in our study was localization, which on its surface seems like a responsible thing for governments to create jobs, to keep investments in their countries. But when you think of the scale of installations that we need to hit our net zero targets, we need regionalization. Countries cannot build a full supply chain to serve their projects. There is a huge opportunity if they supply regional demand instead of national demand. And this was something that we looked at in our study and consultations. Companies need to have a strong investment case to scale up, or if it's a company that isn't in wind that has the potential to pivot some of their operations towards the wind industry, they need that kind of demand to justify the investments to hit the scales that we're talking about to start tripling installations by the end of the decade.
Breanne, you referenced the study that has just been completed. And can you fully introduce that to the audience for us? So ERM and the Global Wind Energy Council have just completed a bit of research. What was that all about? What did we cover?
Well, this is a GWEC project that they brought us into that was presented in Korea a few weeks ago. And we looked at the onshore and offshore wind supply chains across all of APAC. It was a pretty exciting study because we did a bottom-up assessment of the suppliers in the regions, and not just the existing suppliers, but we looked at transition companies as well, which we defined as companies that had relevant operations. So it could be automotive, it could be electronics, it could be shipbuilding, some of these industries that could pivot towards wind to meet this huge demand that we're seeing for wind installation. So the study looked across the region. We looked at where there's existing supply. We did a bottleneck analysis as well. We looked at the regional supply and demand, and then we also looked at countries specifically and how well suited they were to meet demand. I think one of the interesting parts of the study was that considering China and India, a lot of the demand can be covered. But as soon as you take those countries out of play, then all of a sudden the impact of concentration risk is very prominent. And in addition to that, we looked at where there could be strengths in some of these other countries to fill more of the supply chain. And there's huge experience and expertise in the region to grow a supply chain in a regional way in time to scale up to the installation targets that we're aiming for. So, and what are the strengths in the region in order to create a more resilient supply chain?
And Feng, I'm eager to draw you in on the same topic here as to, sort of highlights of the study. And I'm intrigued, Breanne's comments talk about regionalization, and it makes perfect sense, but countries forever, and I think still, approach energy as a security issue. We don't always play nice across borders when it comes to energy development and distribution. So can you talk to how we make that happen effectively and how it is happening in APAC already?
This region actually faces the same challenge in terms of permitting and also infrastructure. And also we have this social consensus issue as well. So we believe that, looking at the new information between now and 2030, APAC region are going to meet up another 50% of the new additions. To get there, we believe that, of course, we cannot afford to miss China, its largest market, and also India, number 2 in this region. But to achieve the climate target, are we going to simply rely on a few countries? No, for energy transition or climate change pathway, we cannot afford to miss anyone. So when looking at the APAC regions, for this study, primarily, we are looking at how countries outside of the 2 key markets, China, India, can grow. That's why we're promoting the information in a new market in this region to make sure that countries can benefit from the energy transition in general. We're looking at how countries, they can leverage their own strengths and they can collaborate. So countries can play the complementary roles to support each other. That's how we see, the regional growth. Again, this report talk about a lot in terms of local country requirement, but we cannot afford to have each market to build entire value chain. This will never happen, and we don't have enough time either. So therefore, we want to make sure that countries understand, each other. They know the weakness, the strengths. So, but by working together across the border, actually, we can achieve a lot through the economical way and make everything supply chain efficient. That's pretty much, a goal for us to promote.
Breanne, I want to loop back and keep going kind of on the study and on how we work regionally. And if there's an example of where the regional cooperation is strongest, it would be fantastic to hear that. And then maybe the stretch on the question might be that kind of even when decisions are taken about development, when the technology is available, sometimes it's the supply chain that isn't ready to deliver everything necessary. Or Feng mentioned kind of the social consensus that's necessary to develop scaled projects. Can you take us a bit farther down that path?
I guess an example could be Vietnam. We have seen situations where there's been Korean suppliers that have set up factories in Vietnam. So kind of taking the best of one country and the best of another country to expand some of the supply chain. Similarly, we've looked at countries that don't have wind pipelines like Singapore, but they have huge shipbuilding expertise and actually have supplied a lot of wind projects, including projects in Europe. And so why not bring them into the mix? Just they don't have projects, but they have huge expertise that the region can benefit from. So those are 2 examples. One challenge on the vessels is also going into this localization or cabotage rules. And we see that with the Jones Act in the US. This is something that is not unique to APAC, but considering the cost, and the time it takes to build these vessels, I think this is a good example of where a regional approach could make a lot of sense, especially looking at weather patterns and the way that kind of APAC is geographically. Having vessels work, have more uptime would also make the business case stronger for those investments, better returns for those companies that are providing the vessels. So this is another example of where a more regional approach could actually help with having more bespoke vessels for the region and unlocking the investment to build these huge assets.
And Breanne, just to help our listeners, I think when we went from shipbuilding to vessels, people might be picturing boats, but by vessels in this case, you mean floating platforms?
I mean the installation vessels, the ones that have to jack down and that have cranes that are huge to install the foundations and the turbines. These are not possible to build in every country. That's not the most efficient way of doing it. So it's those kinds of vessels. But the argument also extends to other vessels as well. You need the vessels to install the projects, but then you also need the service vessels. And so there could also be more sharing of vessels between countries as well.
Terrific. So this is almost like the mobile equipment and infrastructure that you need to do this scale of development across the region, and shared in this case makes a ton of sense. What about the supply chain side of it, Breanne, is what's needed kind of literally in the pipeline to develop these assets?
One of the challenges right now for making those investments to develop the supply chain is we're seeing countries putting targets out, and that's very encouraging. And some countries are taking that a step further and making auction schedules that are quite transparent and longer looking in time. The challenge, though, is that often companies do not feel that they can invest until projects start being awarded. And so there's a little bit of hesitation for the scale up until that kind of security of supply and demand meets. So suppliers are looking at, industry is looking at the market seriously, but there's a little bit of hesitation until there's a credible, more reliable pipeline. And this is another reason, going back to the regionalization, that's attractive, because if you know that the auction schedule across various countries is going to provide a huge number of opportunities, that also increases your appetite of investing and scaling up.
Got it. So looking really for clearer supply and demand signals that people can move forward on with confidence, I think. Feng, if we keep going on the research a bit, it keyed in on strengths and opportunities in a half dozen markets. So Australia, Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, and Vietnam. And the ways that those might be scaled up or transition to better supply the industry. So keeping going with this theme of supply, can you pick out one or two examples about how each of these countries can help scale up supply chains?
Pick up South Korea, for example. That's where we launched this report 2 weeks ago. South Korea, looking at the project pipeline, even though offshore-wise, they don't have, I think by the end of 2023, they only have like 150 plus megawatt installed. It's not impressive compared with big market in Europe or China. But again, this market got a huge pipeline. Looking at what they have so far, they do have a liquid supply chain already ready for onshore and offshore turbine assembly. At the same time, they have two vessels already available. But for South Korea, we basically look at potential. Even though two vessels, it's even less than what we can find in Japan. But they have three key shipyards like HD, Hyundai, Samsung, and Hanwha. They are top three shipbuilding across the global. Like a Hanwha, Korean conglomerate, they are actually building like two new vessels for the European vessel operator. And not just shipbuilding capability or supply chain already existing for onshore and offshore nacelle. In South Korea, actually, they have this strong supply chain for steel making. Foundation suppliers, they already export the piles, jacket foundation to support, offshore wind project in Taiwan, for example. And also they have the cable industry like LS Cable. They are one of the largest in APAC. They are not just to support the project work for offshore in the home market in Taiwan. They actually building their own momentum in Europe, not just for offshore wind project. They are also supplying HVDC cables for the interconnections between the countries laboring the North Sea. And also this market, they have the supply chain available for electronic component. So they can produce the generator, they can produce power converter. So there are a lot of stuff they can produce. They cannot do everything, but we definitely believe that they have their own strengths. Looking at other markets, for example, Breanne, she mentioned Vietnam. I was actually, in order to complete the stakeholder consultation to support this project, I was in Ho Chi Minh City 2 months ago. I joined, some of the developers and the local stakeholders. They were interesting. In Vietnam, for example, they don't have real offshore installed, but this country, they have really strong expertise from oil and gas industry. That's where, they already win orders. I stopped, I visited the headquarters, that's Petro Vietnam. There's their subsidiary company called PTSC. They already, offering the whole set of the steel structure we use for offshore wind. They built the foundation substation for project in Taiwan. They also actually start export the product for developer in Europe. So that's absolutely something amazing. Also shipyard or in Norway, they are actually set up the joint ventures in this market as well. Of course, so far they cannot build like the big jackup vessels. South Korea can build, for example, Samsung, Hyundai, or Hanwha. But back, in Vietnam, those shipyard, they can build the service vessels, for example, SOV, CSOV, crew transfer vessels. Potentially, they can build cable land vessels. So again, it's amazing to see, being through the journey to see what's the strength of each market and how good they are. If we put the strength together, they can build a really, really, strong supply chain to support growth in APAC. Not just in APAC, actually, potentially they can cover the gaps across the entire global wind supply chain.
Yeah, and we obviously need that so badly. That this might be a fun fact. I don't know if either of you will have it at your fingertips, but as I listen to the sort of dilemma around getting the jackup vessels and the service vessels built, how many more vessels do we need? Like, do we have 50% of the capacity necessary to develop what we need to make our 2030 and 2050 targets, or where are we in vessel development?
Looking at the APAC regions, Japan, South Korea, they have their own vessels, potentially can support their own demand. But looking at the Taiwanese market, they only have one vessel. One vessel means that they can maximum build, 1 gigawatt offshore wind turbine per year. But looking at the pipeline, looking at the target, they want to build, 1.5 gigawatt on average, between now and 2035. So where are they going to get the vessels? So right now it's fine. We have relatively downtime or flat growth in Europe, so they can leverage or borrow the vessels from Europe. But when the installation pick up in Europe, those vessels need to be recalled from Taiwan or somewhere else in APAC back to support growth at home. So then they are going to be a trouble, for market like Taiwan. So again, we need, looking at this ecosystem in terms of a supply chain. Of course, you may argue, okay, without a foreign project pipeline, it's dangerous to make huge investment because the vessel is costly. One single vessel, jackup vessels, cost like 300 to 400 million US dollar per vessel. Yeah. So you also the technology change dramatically. So you don't want to end up with, by the time you got the vessel delivered, and then your vessel is out of date because the turbine is growing,
right,
year after year. That's another challenge for the industry. So again, I think to support the growth, we have to be smart and to achieve a dedicated balance. Otherwise, in one way we cannot get enough vessels. In another way, you made the investment, but it's a huge waste.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got, and with the scale of those investments, of course, you want these pieces of kit fully deployed. And it sounds like in the short term, there's technically enough capacity to get done what's on the books for the next few years if all of the equipment is perfectly deployed. But we're going to need far more capacity in the not too distant future. We've sort of been traipsing through the state of wind energy a little bit broadly, mostly keying in on the development in APAC, getting a bit of a hint of regionalization strategy and what the supply chains look like. One of the things we touched earlier that I want to come back to, and Breanne, I'll bring this to you first, is kind of the social consensus element. So the study, again, that was released in South Korea just a few weeks ago, talked about how industry, government, civil society, finance community, all these actors all need to do their specific part to make this happen. It's a collective system change challenge. So, Breanne, how does that happen? What are the top one or two priorities for the collective group of stakeholders to collaborate on? And Feng, after Breanne answers, I'm going to bring the same question to you.
I think one is this kind of balance between innovation and standardization. And I think the wind industry has been spectacular at driving down the cost of energy through accelerated innovation and new ideas across construction and operations. So definitely commending the industry on what they've done in a very short period of time. However, we're at a point, I think, in the sector that we need to shift towards standardization. This is hard on the supply chain when the latest turbine design changes on almost a yearly basis. Sometimes we need the industry to align on certain standards, and so the supply chain can scale up with a design technology that is going to stay the same. Maybe it doesn't have to stay the same forever, but at least for a certain period of time when these projects are being built. So that would be one thing. And actually standardization, this is one piece on standardizing the technology, but if you're coming back to the regionalization being two, standardization also extends to health and safety, ESG, design codes, all of these things I think should be a priority in order to really capitalize on the benefits that a regional scale up would bring.
So we not only need to agree on the kind of what targets, but very much on the how and the processes that we'll follow to get these things delivered. Feng, how do you sort of view the collective challenge, the social consensus challenge, and what needs to be focused on to have everybody really welcome the development that is necessary to deliver the renewables that we're counting on?
The answer is simple. We need to do it and we do it right at the very first beginning, because there are so many lessons learned across the industry, not just in APAC, like market in Taiwan. There are so many things we can marriage. That's where the offshore wind started back in 1991. And looking at the APAC region, when we see we need to get everything right, primarily focus on this ecosystem. We want to make sure that the wind industry, the government, the civil society, the financial community, they understand why we're building the supply chain. Of course, we got tripling target, we got climate target, but to get the capacity there is one thing. Another thing is that we need to make sure that when we build this capacity, build up the supply chain to achieve the onshore offshore wind deployment, we need to make sure that the supply chain is sustainable. But how to make sure the supply chain is sustainable? That's where the industry needs to work together with the government. Make sure that we build up the supply chain. We need to think about how to make sure that we're doing the manning, production, installation, everything is equal. Make sure that we follow the ESG that's already mentioned by Breanne. And we have to have a high standard. Make sure that countries, primarily the vulnerable community, they will get benefit from the energy transition. When we talk about APAC, China, India, relatively mature. We got Japan, South Korea, relatively, those market, the developed market. But we still have a long list of countries in this region. There are actually a group of global South countries where we need the global financial community to support. Of course, they have the natural resources for mining, etc. But again, who is going to provide the finance? So provide the finance, one thing, we have to think about the environment control, make sure that, the standard ESG, make sure that, we got this also human right as well, make sure that, people got the fair pay to achieve the justice transition. Again, I think there's so many steps need to be done together by the industry. We got target, it's clear. I think it's a matter of, how we get there. That's the important thing. That's what we keep saying. We keep telling, these policy makers, make sure that you understand this is a huge opportunity. To capitalize those opportunity, we have to make sure that it's equal transition, make sure that market, countries, people will mutually or equally benefit from the entire energy or renewable deployment. I think that's a goal. Without achieve this kind of ecosystem, even if we get target installed, I still believe that's a failure. So again, we need a collective approach to get there. But we're not there yet, but I'm confident if we working together, that GWEC has been working with industry. I mentioned GOA, Global Offshore Wind Alliance. We have Ocean Energy Pathway Initiative as well, Global Renewable Alliance. So the goal is to make sure that we get there. We make sure that we achieve the just energy transition.
Yeah, no, that collective benefit had echoes of just transition all the way through it. And I'm glad that that was mentioned in your closing line. And listening to the comments on finance, for the folks who are listening to the podcast on the other side, we're recording this as it happens in mid-December, just after COP29 in Baku, where the focus was so much on finance. And while $300 billion as agreed there is a big number, we know it's not nearly enough. And we're hearing echoes of that in this conversation specific to wind as well. With those kind of hopes and confident expectations for where wind and renewables are going to go in 2025 and beyond, I just would really love to say thanks, Feng, especially to you joining us from the Global Wind Energy Council and for your partnership with ERM over time. Breanne, wonderful to have you bring your insight and kind of represent the 400 ERMers working on renewables every day. Appreciate you both very much for your time and insight. For all of you listening, if you are interested in other Sustainable Connections podcasts, they are all available on erm.com. We would love any feedback you might provide on this episode or other. And just thank you for listening once more. Bye for now.